Ursula K. Le Guin has a wonderful quote: "To prefer light to darkness is to misunderstand both." I think it's an excellent way to kick off this episode, because today I want to talk about the concept of contrast, which I think is a foundational part of understanding, of perception, and even of wisdom. And to explore this, we're going to be looking at an example of light and darkness, but that's not really what the video is about. The video, what I'm really arguing, is about the interplay between opposites, how it is that tension that helps us make art, morality, consciousness, and even light itself. After all, we can only see the form because of the shadow. So to deny the darkness is to flatten reality, but to integrate it is to finally see. So again, we're going to be using light and dark all the way through as an example. One other caveat that I want to bring up, and then we're going to dive right in, is when I started this channel, I thought I was going to be doing more like, let's talk about a myth today. Let me tell you the story from history. Here's something cool that's happening in science. And I'm sure I'm still going to do much of that, but the last few episodes have been taking concepts like light, or silence, or now contrast, and exploring it through myth and history and philosophy and psychology and art. And I've been really enjoying that. Let me know if you have. But otherwise, I do promise to kind of get back to the original plan. I hope you'll stick with me today, as this episode is really challenging binary thinking, a closer look into the idea of non-dualism. And so to start, I like looking at the ancient or the mythical ideas behind these concepts. Let's talk about the mythic roots of duality. Starting with our early civilizations, we haven't talked much about Mesopotamia, but they had Marduk, which is order and light, versus Tiamat, chaos and darkness. In Egypt, you have Ra, the sun god, who battles Apep nightly. The sun dies and is reborn, so light is cyclical there. We do get the first cosmic dualism between light and dark, between good and evil, with Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda versus Angra Mainyu. And then, of course, in the Hebrews Genesis account, we have God at creation separating the light from the dark. In Maya understanding, you have day and night locked in eternal motion, those gods ever together. In Japan, one of my favorite goddesses in all of mythology, Amaterasu, who is the sun goddess, hides in a cave. The world's light depends on her return. And then one you're all probably familiar with in Chinese cosmology, you have the yin and yang, the dark, which is receptive, and the light, which is active. This is interdependence, not conflict. It was William Blake who said, "Without contraries, there is no progression." Again, I think that's just a really good framing for what we're trying to talk about here today. So hopefully you see a lot of variation in how people internalize and externalize the contrast of light and dark, which again is just an example today. Light myths seem to celebrate revelation. Dark myths protect mystery, and there always seems to be a tension or sometimes even an argument between the two. But for our next section, I want to use art to explore contrast more. It's the perfect episode to finally bring out this lens. So let's start with paintings and some visual art here. There is a concept, chiaroscuro, an artistic technique that uses contrast between light and dark to create a sense of drama and volume. Chiaroscuro is just Italian for light, dark. And I'll give you a few examples, but I want to take a second and really examine this through one of the best painters that utilizes this technique, Caravaggio. I'm going to put up on the screen the taking of Christ. This is the moment when Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss, and yet what dominates the scene isn't the act itself, but the light. A single cold lantern cuts through the blackness. It's not light coming from heaven, it's from a servant, a bystander that is illuminating the cruelty. Notice how the light glances across the steel armor, the sweat, and the terrified eyes. It's carving the figure out of darkness, like truth forced from some shadow. Look at the face of Jesus here. It's serene, almost sorrowful, but Judas is clinging to him, desperate, guilty, very human. Caravaggio paints no divine glow around Jesus that is so typical for this era. The only halo is reflection, just utilizing that light on the metal. It's chiaroscuro at its finest, at its purest. Light and dark locked together, each defining the other. The light isn't conquering the darkness here. It's revealing the darkness. It exposes what we would rather keep hidden. So maybe that's why we need the dark, not to hide the truth, but to recognize when it finally breaks through. Again, it's about reframing our ideas of opposites, of the binary. And good and evil, light and dark is just the easiest way to have this conversation. You can see this a lot with Rembrandt. For someone that might be more familiar to you, Rembrandt is all about internal light. It's never light coming down. It's illumination from within, not above. You can look at Turner, who is dissolving forms in light. The chaos of color reveals transcendence. Or the fields of color from Rothko, kind of an abstract concept of emotional light or illumination coming from the void. But it's not just paintings. We see it in film and photography. You're probably slightly familiar with the concept of film noir, where morality is visualized in the shadow, in the in-between. The ambiguity here is light's companion. I was just introduced to Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, where death walks in daylight. Their enlightenment doesn't banish darkness. And just for fun, I'm going to throw out one more example for film. I'm a big Stanley Kubrick fan, and I would encourage you guys, if you haven't seen 2 of these movies, to go and watch them and see how he plays with light, specifically with contrast. In the movie Barry Lyndon, he chose to film only by candlelight. He had to use special NASA cameras that would be able to still pick things up. But that means that every single shot, every single face is constantly changing as the flicker of the fire is constantly coming in and out. A kind of obscurity within the contrast that is really, really cool. Or then you can see a crescendo in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which most of you are probably familiar with. How does the film begin? This cosmic darkness, infinite, silent, unknowable. But how does it end? In the blinding, color-saturated metamorphosis of the Star Child. And again, I do have an index linked below, so anything that I mentioned today, whether it is a book or a painting or a movie, or what we're going to get into, just a piece of architecture, it will be listed in that index below. So before we move out of art, I do want to say that, again, it's everywhere. It's not just painting and photography and film. It's architecture. It's what is 3D. Look at Tado Ando's Church of the Light. Just concrete and a single cross-shaped slit for illumination. Or look at the Japanese wabi-sabi aesthetics, impermanence and subtle shadow. If you have a hard time appreciating this, just visually or hearing my really bad explanations, I'll also try to link some kind of source material that can help you appreciate an art appreciation book or course, if you will. But I'm only familiar with wabi-sabi because of this wonderful, cool book that was recommended to me, In Praise of Shadows. It's an essay on Japanese aesthetics. A quote from that book is that we find beauty not in the thing itself, but in the pattern of shadows. Speaking to this concept in photography, George Eastman has a quote I'll share with you. Light makes photography, but shadow defines it. So many people, again, that binary thinking, think about darkness as the absence of beauty. Again, in reference here to art. In morality, it's the absence of good. In truth, it's the absence of knowing. But can we think about it differently? For the art example, could we think about darkness as the frame instead of the absence of beauty? The frame is what brings it together, holds it, encompasses it, allows it. That's such a better way, I think, of thinking. And again, this isn't to be applied just for light and darkness. This is for contrast at large. But let's move on to the psychological and philosophical lens of looking at contrast. I don't know how we could possibly talk about this concept without talking about Carl Jung and the idea of the shadow. Now, this has been popularized a lot recently and in ways that I don't particularly love. And not to say that there's no value there, but I think that it can do a disservice, in my opinion, to oversimplifying or utilizing some kind of concept of it for an agenda that just isn't, again, what I saw as the nature of it. Jung has a quote that I think really explains it quite well. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Wow, I just think that's amazing. The shadow isn't evil to Jung. It is the unacknowledged self. And yeah, we're probably not acknowledging those parts for a reason. Maybe they're difficult, maybe they're hard, maybe they're traumatic, maybe they're painful, but that's because we have, again, the binary thinking that all of that is bad. Going back to Plato's cave, just because it hurts doesn't mean it's bad. It leads to something beautiful if you're willing to look, if you're willing to go through the pain, if you're willing to ascend. It's all about integration to Jung instead of denial. So what he saw was people denying their shadow side, their potential darkness out of fear. But can you integrate it in a healthy fashion to become whole? Think about it. If there really is, and again, this is even kind of binary thinking that I don't love, but if there really is a duality of man, and we can just say a spectrum to get rid of that binary thinking, and you're only over here on the spectrum, I only want to focus on what feels comfortable, what I consider to be good. I'm only going to think of myself in these positive lights, etc. Then you're not whole, are you? The whole means all. And so to come to terms with the fullness of that spectrum is to become whole. So I promise we will do another episode on Jung's shadow, on the Red Book in general. There's so much that I want to talk about there, but just a drop for today. We can see a similar thing with Freud, with the id and the concept of repression. Oh, and you guys should see right here all the books from the last few episodes, and I don't think I brought Freud down. Next, I'm going to talk about Kierkegaard, and he's somewhere under here. I actually have a few of his books, and I'm not sure where this one comes from, but here's Either Or in a Fragmented Life. But Kierkegaard talks about this existential paradox. To him, faith is a leap into darkness. Well, that would be from Fear and Trembling. Sorry, wrong book. Which, is right here. There we go. Sorry, Chaos. But that's okay. From there, we get the concept that without the dark, we would never see the stars, which are then associated with meaning. A book I cannot recommend enough that I feel I've never heard anyone speak about before is Fragments of Heraclitus. He says that the path up and down are one and the same. There's just so many good thinkers on duality. Simone de Beauvoir, Hannah Arendt, and Alan Watts. Which, by the way, I think my Wednesday episode will be on Alan Watts, on a speech he gave about those who see clearly, the danger for them, and how to help. I really think you'll enjoy it, so make sure you're back for that. And just a friendly reminder, if you're enjoying any of this, go ahead and subscribe right now. Please turn on notifications. YouTube has changed their algorithm. If you are not turning on notifications, it's very possible you won't see these videos when they come out. And if you want to help the channel grow, please give a like, give a share, watch all the way through, leave a comment, or join the Patreon. Okay, plug over. Let's get back to this. I think the psychological and philosophical point is really simple. Denying darkness makes it dangerous. And again, integrating the darkness into our life, since it is part of existence and reality. And I know we're being really vague and abstract with utilizing the term darkness in the first place, but again, this is what makes us whole. So moving on to our next section, what does science and or physics have to say about contrast? Neuroscience, and I won't be able to explain this well with all the technical verbiage. I did a lot of research on this, but here's the main takeaway that neuroscience has helped us understand. In terms of our vision, which our eyes are tied to our brain, how we actually see, like how we literally see, is by comparing dark and light. A lateral inhibition. Our retinal cells are exaggerating contrast to create edges, again, to give us sight. I think that's so cool. And I'm probably reaching, trying to use this as an example. But again, we see that contrast equals the whole, not focusing on one or the other. You need the interplay for it all to work. So yeah, no, actually, I think that does work. In terms of physics and cosmology, again, if we're sticking with the example of light and darkness, just look at the universe. As far as we can tell, 95% dark. It is dark matter that shapes galaxies. Dark energy that drives the expansion of the universe. Light cannot exist without vacuum. Even photons, what carries light, needs contrast to travel. And then quantum paradoxes, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but light functions as both a wave and a particle. Finally, a true physical duality, to echo all the metaphysical ones. We see a beautiful kind of paradox or contrast in nature as well. This is a neat fact. Did you know bioluminescent species, the ones that produce light, thrive in total darkness? Is that not so cool and strange? Plants require cycles of both dark and light. Otherwise, they cannot photosynthesize. Otherwise, they cannot rest. Growth needs both. Maybe that is just the easiest way to say this. Thomas Carlyle got this concept perfectly. He says, the night is as necessary to day as rest is to work. Again, integrating the whole, finding the balance, exploring non-duality. You guys know I love Carl Sagan, and dang it, there's another book, I just forgot to pull it out. He says, we are stardust arranged to see itself again. We are bright against infinite dark. Just playing with the tension, the contrast. So I think we'll kind of end with one more section, the moral and cultural dualities around this, kind of the dance of the two. So I'd mentioned at the beginning that there is this difference in thinking between Western thought and Eastern or more ancient thought. The Western obsession with purity, with light, with good, with the binary is just so very different. We can thank Augustine for some of this from the Christian influence. He is the one who calls evil a mere absence of good. So he banishes the darkness and thus strips it of meaning and usefulness. Before Augustine, we had Manichaeism. It saw light and dark as these co-eternal forces perpetually locked in struggle. The cosmos itself became a moral battleground. And so that split really bled into the Western ideology. Saint versus sinner, heaven versus hell, body versus spirit, etc. Just a world of binaries, yes and no's. And specifically in our example today, which is the most extreme example of contrast, light and dark, that ideology of pure light, that's so dangerous because it can justify cruelty in the name of righteousness. Better said, the danger of worshiping light is that it blinds. And we've seen it whenever a nation or a church or a person sees themselves as pure light, their shadow then grows monstrous because it's unseen, which again is why Jung is saying we need to acknowledge it, bring it in, integrate it. Only then can we be whole and healthy. And we saw that much more in a lot of the Eastern mysticism, going beyond the binary. Taoism has a really simple teaching around this. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. By the way, none of this is to say that there's not classifications of harm or well-being, that there's not certain things that are better than worse. It's just trying to recognize and frame it and name it better. This is not some advocation that anything should go, that there's no such thing as a bad act, or that harm doesn't really exist. Or maybe to better explain this, Buddhism has an understanding that compassion arises from the recognition that joy and suffering share the same root, impermanence. Again, it's about reframing here. The Bhagavad Gita reframes darkness as ignorance. What a smart little switch, because ignorance, and it goes further, ignorance to be transformed can be fixed. It doesn't need to be despised, it needs to be helped. It's just part of the natural rhythm of being. There's some wonderful stories that have helped blur the line and explore this tension and contrast. Milton's Paradise Lost, which I'm just going to stop bringing books down because I always forget to bring some down and then I feel incomplete. But I love Paradise Lost. And in it, Milton makes Satan the most human character, the light bearer turned rebel. Talk about flipping the script. Or Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which flipped colonial light, as it was previously presented, into moral shadow. The civilized world becomes the true wilderness. And comic books, which are just modern myths, are another great place to see this. I mean, look at Batman. Look at the tension in Batman between the light and the dark, between what is right, what is moral, what is not, what is evil. Where does justice live in Gotham? In the shadows. A very modern echo of that ancient concept. That was a lot. How do we end? What is the main takeaway? What is the point of talking about this? It's that contrast isn't just how we see the world. It's actually what makes the world visible at all. Each truth that we hold is outlined by its opposite. A simple example of this is that every act of courage exists only because fear is real. We spend our lives chasing the light, which again, not a bad thing necessarily, but if done in isolation and without balance and understanding, then less useful. Because without that contrast, there's nothing to even see. Only blindness in both directions. The error of going too far in either way. This balance was the goal. And I kind of wanted to make it because I felt like maybe I overreached on that second episode with Plato's allegory of the cave, making too much about leaving the dark and going into the light. But that's a small part within the grand total. Still, once out of the cave, if we can ever even think that we are, there remains a balance to be struck. This is that balance. Contrast, I think, is what makes meaning. Contrast is what makes us human. So let me know your thoughts on today's episode. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I truly appreciate it. I'll see you Wednesday with that Alan Watts video. And until then, keep sharing. Would you consider joining these fine people? Our Blaze Tier members get a call out at the end of each video, so thank you so much to D. Cox and James Geider for your incredible, generous support. You'll also note that we have 4 people on our Flame Tier. Your support is necessary and needed and much appreciated. And then we have a few more in our Ember Tier already, which is listed in the description of this video. A sincere thank you to each and every one of you.